Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Harness the Energy and Smarts of Your Business Colleagues to Contribute to Your BPM Strategy. I'm Niamh Lordan, Digital Marketing Manager at FlowForma, the host of today's event. With me, we have Forrester's Vice President and Principal Analyst, John Rymer, and Neil Young, CEO of FlowForma. I would like to thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I would just like to take care of some housekeeping and offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. Just to point out that today's webinar is being recorded. If you have trouble logging into audio or any other issues during the webinar, you can email info@flowforma.com for assistance. Throughout the webinar, your lines will be muted, but you can use the Q&A function on your right-hand side to ask questions, which we will answer at the end. After the webinar, we will send a copy of the recording to everyone, and we would appreciate it if you could complete our short feedback form at the end. Now I want to introduce our speakers for today. Neil Young, CEO of FlowForma, the leading provider of business process management tools for Microsoft Office 365. Neil has spent the last number of years driving FlowForma's software-as-a-service business model and is passionate about revolutionizing the traditional BPM space to enable the business user meet the needs of today's demanding digital workplace through an innovative no-code approach. John Rymer is one of the most respected advisors in the IT industry. His experience and insights, gained in over 20 years of research and practicing, are trusted by many of the most successful organizations worldwide. John leads Forrester's application development and delivery coverage of cloud platforms, including Microsoft Windows Azure and Amazon Web Services. In recent months, John and team have helped lead the industry with their research in the area of low-code platforms. So John, we're delighted to have you with us today. Would you like to get started?
Yes, thank you very much. Great to be here. Let's advance the slide. So what I'm going to do is present the research I've been doing into this topic, how we can actually harness our colleagues in the business to help us deliver the software that we need. So let's start with a couple of stories about people that you probably know people like I'm going to describe, and the situations like I'm going to describe here. So two people, both are managers. They are business people, not software developers, but they find themselves needing to deliver software to further the operations of their units, of their businesses, and took the initiative to go ahead and do so. In both cases, you can see the business problems essentially come down to these two people needed software that they could not get from their central IT functions, their central application development functions. This is very common in my experience. Central app dev functions and IT functions are usually tied down managing the systems of record and the systems, and so a lot of the operational business units out there go begging. They just don't have the automation that they need to really advance their missions, to really understand their operations effectively, and so forth. So in both of these cases, that was what was going on. In one case, in the case of the engineering systems manager, he actually had access to a SharePoint developer, but the developer could not keep up with the demand, could not produce the software that this group needed, and so essentially they had to find a way to move on. That's another sort of common theme. So what was the solution? In both cases, they adopted what I call a low-code platform. We're going to talk a lot more about that in a minute. Suffice it to say that these are platforms that include tools that allow people to deliver software without having to write code. They use graphical tools and property sheets and the like. What did they need to do to be successful? Well, in one case, they took the group at the energy firm took 2 days of training. And the other situation, this person just got started just with the vendor's documentation and their tooling. It was, in many cases, these low-code platforms are set up to basically allow you to get without training and maybe follow up with some training. And in both cases, what we ended up with were business people, not developers, delivering the software that unit needed to do its work. As you can see, 12 staff in the energy firm are now producing workflows and business process apps. In the case of the IT services firm, it's just the one manager, but his output is now 14 applications in a fairly short amount of time, 14 applications and counting, by himself, delivering these applications. So I'm sure you know people like this. I'm sure over your career you've seen people like this who are successful this way. They are often called citizen developers. They are, in fact, business people who deliver software. Let's flip the slide and take a little closer look at these folks and what motivates them. Next slide. So this is some data that we gathered from a survey. Actually, we do some surveying, and we also were fortunate enough to come across a survey that was done by a vendor that also we thought was very illuminating. Two things we're addressing here. First is, you're a business person. Why would you want to spend your time developing applications? And by the way, as we'll see, a lot of times these folks develop this software on their own time. They have their day jobs, but they do this software work as well. Why? It's additional work, it's additional risk. Essentially, they do it because it's interesting, because it makes their lives more interesting, because they've got aptitude for the work, and they like the work, and it helps them do their jobs better. I mean, it's that in a nutshell. There are a lot of folks that are very motivated in this way, because it just makes their working life more effective, and it makes it more interesting. Secondly, what kinds of applications do these folks actually develop? Are they developing the core accounting system? No. They're developing applications that produce reports that allow them to analyze data. Typically, the scope of that analysis is restricted to their operations. They want to know what's going on in their business units, what's working, what isn't working, triage the cause of breakdowns in their processes, and the like. So they pull together a lot of data and do analysis and reporting on that data to solve problems. The second major category is what I call administrative applications. These are applications that help these groups, help these individuals and their groups automate their work so that their work is done faster, it's done better, more consistently, more accurately, eliminate the human error from manual processes, eliminate cost, and just, in this day and age, automation is so crucial, as we'll see. So it's these two types of apps, which it turns out are very important to effective operations of business processes. Next slide. So I use the term citizen developer to describe these folks, as many people do. But in my research, I've found that citizen developer is actually a really squishy term. It's really ill-defined. It means different things to different people. So what I sought to do in my research was to get to the next level of detail and really understand, in really understanding these people and their activities, I concluded that there are actually three types of business people who deliver software, aka citizen developers. Again, some of these, at least one of these types, the power user, should be very, very familiar to all of us. We've had power users forever. I've been doing research for 20 years, been in the industry longer than that. Power users were around way, 20, 30 years ago. They still are with us. They're very helpful. They serve themselves and their teams. Typically, their scope is very limited. They're very helpful around the office in getting, solving technology questions and getting things done. And they can, in fact, produce some useful analyses and tools and workflows at times. The next persona is a little different. This is what I call the business developer. Now, these folks are more like the two stories I told at the beginning. These are folks who run groups. They run operational groups typically. They oftentimes are either VPs or directors or managers. They've got those managerial titles, and they will develop and deliver software to further the operations of their groups. They want their groups to be effective. Oftentimes they're crunched for resources, so they're looking for automation to make sure their operations are running effectively, and so on. And what's important to realize about these people is that they know their processes and the data that they need to effectively run their processes really, really well. And so given effective tools, they actually are in a great position to actually deliver automation that really matters, that really makes a difference. It's very, very different from someone with a general background who comes in and has to learn their business. These folks actually they're on the front lines. They know their business. If we can equip them with the right tools, they can actually be very effective in self-serving, delivering the automation that they need. Last type here is what I call the line of business developer. Essentially, a line of business developer is a business developer who's graduated into a full-time job delivering software for a business unit. These folks don't work for central IT. Typically, they report up to the business unit's leadership. They're very similar to the business developer in that they know their processes and their data really well. It's just that they now are not doing this work in their spare time. They're doing it as a job. They're doing it as a full-time job. So if we flip the slide, if we can understand the types within our organization, the business developer types, we can reasonably hope to create a strategy to harness them and their energy. Now, let me just take a moment here. Why is it so important to have this conversation? I believe this is a really, really vital conversation for us to be having. We've had business people develop software over the years and deliver software over the years. It's nothing new, but it's really, really important now because we have to deliver so much software, all of us, whatever enterprise we're in. We are all transforming our businesses and our organizations from analog and physical forms to digital forms. Digital means lots of software. These are two quotes that I love. One is from Mark Andreessen, who is a venture capitalist now, longtime software industry visionary, who made the observation several years ago that software is in fact eating the business world. Business is software, software is business. There's really no longer any worthwhile distinction between the two. Secondly, is from an executive at the Intercontinental Hotels chain who made the observation that these days speed is everything. Speed of business action is everything. That is the competitive dynamic that's out there. And if you hope to be fast and you're quick in your business responsiveness, your operations have to be automated. If you've got to change a whole bunch of manual processes and physical assets in order to implement a change in business, it's going to be much, much slower than your competitor who's doing it in software. And so in my mind, this is crucial because we don't have enough. There's a shortage of developers. Every client we're working with is dealing with this. There's a shortage of talent out there. And so we need to come up with new ways of delivering the automation we need. And here we have business people readily at hand who are capable of filling this gap. Next slide. So how do we do this? Again, this is the business people delivering software is not new. Either are some of the problems that have occurred in the past with business people delivering lousy software that's hard to maintain, et cetera. So how do we do this? How do we actually equip people to be productive and not, pose up some new risks and to the business and creating messes, frankly? Well, there's 2 points here. There's 2 things we need to do, 2 big things. One is we need to stop thinking of business people creating software as pirates, as rogues and rogue IT. It's something to be squashed and pushed and basically, you know, something to be halted, you know, and ended. We need to guide and support and nurture these pros. They've got a lot of talent. They've got a lot of aptitude. They've got a lot of knowledge. If we can somehow channel that energy and that knowledge into productive software, we're going to be really happy. And then the second point here really gets to the notion of low-code platforms that I mentioned earlier. You know, the history of citizen developers is one that's primarily based on people doing work in spreadsheets and in desktop databases and you know, and maybe some email. They're essentially using productivity tools, personal productivity tools, to deliver the automation that they need. Maybe they work with an online web environment or SharePoint or something like that, but generally they're working with personal productivity tools. These tools are unmanaged, and that's been the root of a lot of the problems with citizen developers, is what they produce is essentially unmanaged. Well, what if we could shift all of that energy and that activity onto managed platforms? Then we'd have the ability to guide the work, to see what work is being done, to actually head off issues, and maybe even take over maintenance of useful applications. Maybe have professional developers take over those assets when necessary. Next slide. So, time to talk about low-code platforms. Or some people call them no-code. Some people would call what they do no-code platforms. Low-code platforms are one of the 2 ways to make software delivery faster. One way is to optimize coding. We're not going to talk about that today because we're not talking about coders. The other way to speed software delivery is to change the work. Don't code, or code as little as possible, but rather do the work using visual diagramming tools, visual information mappers. You know, what you see is what you get. Screen design and form design and so on. You're using visual tools in order to define real software applications. That's why we call it low code or no code. Let's take so that's the target environment for the business developers. Let's take a closer look at low code platforms, because there are actually 2 types, 2 segments within the low code marketplace. Next slide. There are actually 2 segments, and it's really important to get this right. Many of the low-code platforms out there are actually designed for professional developers. Their value, their promise is to make those professional developers more productive than they would be if they were working strictly with code, if they were strictly using IDEs and software development kits and the like. These products are designed for these professional developers, and as a result, they have a lot of functionality and a lot of controls. For a business user, they tend to be completely overwhelming. There's too much in the box. It's too complicated for business, I find, for business people to have success. Fortunately, there's another branch or another segment of the low-code market that is devoted to serving these business developers and business people. The products tend to be much simpler, at least to start. They provide a straightforward interface to, say, define a workflow or define forms plus a workflow. There's not a lot of controls that you need to master. You just work with a very straightforward environment. It's all about simplicity. And many of these products provide frameworks. They're based on frameworks that are really, really good at, say, workflow. So you're targeting your use case very, very well. It's really important to get this right, because if you if you're trying to serve your business people and you select a platform that was designed for app dev people, those business people are probably going to fail. Again, it's too complicated for them. So you got to look for low-code platforms that really cater to the needs and the capabilities of business developers. Next slide. Next slide shows lists of vendors that specialize in these segments. I've evaluated all of these vendors in recent work, and I think the evaluations have persuaded me that these two segments do in fact exist, and they are very, very different. So I just flash these up real quickly. You can see there's a lot of vendors out there, a lot of choice, a lot of very good choices for you to look at. Next slide. Now let's talk about the second. So we talked about platform. We talked about the one of the two things that we need to do to really activate this opportunity. The second thing we need to do is create support and support these business people in their work. The diagram you see in front of you is drawn from an actual case that I came across where a business unit had taken responsibility for its applications, as similar to the scenarios I described at the outset here. They were self-serving on a low-code platform. That low-code platform, though, was actually being run by a central IT organization. The central IT organization wasn't delivering the applications, but rather they were managing the platform upon which the business people delivered those applications. And the central IT group had worked with the business group to define appropriate security policies, for example, to define conventions, the conventions that would be used in delivering these applications. What sort of rules of the road do we want in designing user interfaces, for example? That's an example of a convention. So the business people got to focus on process, flows, data, visualization, reports, and so forth. They didn't have to worry about things like, how should I actually structure this application, or what is the security? How am I going to manage the security in this application? All of that was taken care of by their colleagues in central IT. It's a very, very effective collaborative kind of a setup, and I think really is the rubric that we all ought to be shooting for. This is just ideal. Next slide. The other point that I'd make here in terms of support is about governance. Governance is important in any software delivery activity, but the governance when you're dealing with business people delivering apps and you're dealing with low code in general has to be different from earlier generations of IT governance. It has to more carefully balance creativity and experimentation with risk management and risk control. The way I think about it is there are 5 policies that you have to dial up or dial down. Dial up the openness and the permissive, how permissive your policy is. Dial down to be more restrictive. It's okay to dial down and start being rather restrictive as long as you realize that eventually you want to start opening that up and allowing more creativity. So there's these 5 policies. Who does the work? What work do they do? How, in other words, what applications do they actually deliver? How do they do the work? What's the process? Applications are living things, and they have life cycles. What's the process for delivering and then maintaining that life cycle? When do they do the work? What's the priority? Which work gets done first? Which apps get delivered first? And then where? Do we want the whole organization, the whole enterprise to be using this low code, using this approach, or do we just want to restrict it to a single department for now, while we learn what we need to know to be effective, and then we'll open it up to the whole enterprise? Get these 5 policies right, you've got yourself an effective governance framework, and one that can actually evolve as you evolve and as your business people evolve. Next slide. This is when I say thank you, and I hope I've helped, and I'll turn it over to Neil.
Great. Thank you, John. And I know we'll be talking again towards the end of the webinar, but very insightful thoughts as usual. So let me very briefly, just for the audience, introduce FlowForma BPM. So for those of you who have not come across the product before, we have 4 key attributes to the product. We talk about forms, workflow. So in a traditional sense, a lot of people would have seen earlier markets would have been a forms and workflow market. So we still have a concept of forms and workflow, but we tied it all together in our product through an interface we call Flow Designer, where both of those are actually built at the same time. Worth seeing, I suppose, to actually believe how it all ties together. Document generation is the third component, whereby we see with a lot of processes working in organizations, and document generation is part of that. And the ability to use everyday tools like Microsoft Word to build out your templates and connect that to processes and generate PDFs and email them around an organization. That's still very much part and parcel of these solutions. So that's the third component. And in terms of our fourth component, where we've been making a lot of headway recently, is around collaborative decision making. And this is very much around, in an organization, key business decisions that have been made and how we're learning from those key decisions and the different ways to take innovation, etc. So, and again, I'll come back to some use cases in relation to that later on. But if how we approach that is no code, and John made some very good points earlier on around low code and the rationale behind that. And yes, as we sit in the new wave for low code for business developers, we very much talk around no code. We very much realize as we, that was our, 4 or 5 years ago, that was our big goal. But in terms of how we've rationalized it today, if we go back 6 months ago, we would have analyzed 70 plus customer projects just to understand, to reinforce our message. Is that correct? And in terms of the feedback, we found that in 92% of those projects, no code, there was a no code approach, and that included elements where there was integration, where there was reporting. So the other 8% where when we delved into it, were very much around low-level coding required to close an integration gap. So we absolutely understand, on the greater scheme of things, low-code platforms. We're fairly strong about no code, as we do see it's a high percentage of projects we engage with our customers. So we find that very relevant. In terms of the platform, so we're predominantly on Office 365. It's built on top of SharePoint. It can be hosted in Azure, it can be hosted on premise, but Office 365 is our lead-in technology platform. We have received numerous awards to date. Recently, we were voted People's Choice Award at the Microsoft Ignite conference just last month. So delighted with that. But that's really reinforcing that we are delivering on our message. So just to bring that on, then in terms of talking about one of the customers that we deal with quite a lot would be Aon. And if we look at the challenges that Aon had, and we're dealing with them at least 2 years now, I believe. Initially, there was an internal demand, and that demand was very much around, some really bright business managers with really good ideas of ways they could improve the business, even in terms of even on insurance renewals, about the fact-finding process when they were building out renewals to improve the success rate, etc. Down to other areas of the business, as HR improvements, IT improvements, etc. So they had all these ideas, and they needed to be able to deliver down to a regional level of the organization. So how could they leverage a tool to enable their really strong ideas? And then more recently, there's been increasing client demands. So they've had that internal experience with FlowForma, and they've seen success. And then they've come across projects with their clients whereby the clients are expecting access to information that Aon would have in a secure fashion. They want it mobile, in remote locations, and we very much came to the fore there. So I'll talk about those solutions in a little bit more detail, but at a high level, our no-code FlowForma BPM approach for Office 365 was a huge part of it. two dimensions here really. One is in terms of cost that they would save. So how quickly could they do these things, time to market, and all those things that are around that, but how cost effective would it be in terms of ROI? And that's what these platforms provide. And the second element there is around public accessible forms. So being able to extend your processes to their external customers. And we could leverage that with our platform, working with Aon to provide that. So, some high-level results. We improved a lot of efficiency and seamless compliance. So, in terms of ensuring they were compliant also, and there's, regulated industries need this. All those features existed and worked very well for Aon. And in terms of increasing the productivity with their external users and the feedback that they've been receiving from the external solutions that they've rolled out, that's been really strong positivity for Aon. So to delve a little bit deeper on that, if we take some of the processes and with Aon we find we work in a mixed mode, and I think it's important to talk about that. So for certain processes, they will build themselves, and they will work through maybe more complex processes. They will engage with ourselves, and we will consult and work with them. What we found is they've actually, for some of the more complex, they've built out proof of concepts themselves. They've played that back to us, and then we have worked through a project either with them or we've just gone delivered as in standard projects. So I think the crux of the point there is really it can operate in a way whereby people say, okay, low code is brilliant, but I don't have enough resources. And we're saying, okay, we can help with that, or our partners can help with that, because you are going to realize cost savings and time to deliver regardless. And with a longer term view, and our longer term view always is with our customers, is to make them self-sufficient. So in the scenario where Aon are self-sufficient, you would take new joiners, and they've extended this out to leavers, movers in the organization, so where that impacts and it may change their access to permissions, etc. And John mentioned permissions earlier on and how that all relates. So those are managed very well, and these are processes they've built inside the organization themselves. So we're looking at, in terms of HR processes across the board, where they've enabled the technology, IT processes such as logging tickets, requesting new kit, etc. All of that can be built out by themselves. And yeah, as I talked there around ordering equipment, and these are, so our product does come with pre-canned templates, but we always find that organizations take that, either build their own from scratch because they have the ability to do that with the technology, or they may tailor what's provided already. But those that way to make the customer self-enabled, understand, themselves where permissions are controlled and how all that is managed, it all needs to be very much at a power user level. It's got to be business language, and we find we're working with the business managers. So we are connected with IT. IT are a big proponent in Aon of this technology, but we are working in conjunction with IT with the business managers, and the business managers are building out the process. And we're talking earlier on about power users, and we would use the term very much ourselves of process owners. So who knows these processes best? And we're finding, if we can deal with the process owners and enable them with the technology and connect it back to IT, then we're getting win-win for everybody, for the customer, for ourselves. It's a better experience for the end client. And just in terms of, we look at digital business agility, which would be our big vision for the company and the future of where we see things going. This agile world where people are enabling and empowered with the technologies to deliver themselves. From an Aon context, and we talk about everyday processes, we see that they are very self-sufficient in building out these processes themselves. So they do not need to engage ourselves. They do not need to involve a technology partner. They are fully self-sufficient at this level. When we move into some more what we call dark processes, so this would be, and I go back to John's earlier point about unmanaged content built out in Excel and Outlook and moving around. This is how we see this in dark processes, with an added dimension being, in terms of the industry segment, it's very specific. So in life sciences, it could be to do with product defects. In insurance, it could be to do with the policy renewal process. That's not as applicable to life sciences, but it's very applicable to insurance. So how these specific processes of that industry work and how they're being typically unmanaged to date, but they're getting there. They're able to deal with it, but there's no governance, there's no oversight, there's no central control, and that's a big part of the problem we solve. So in Aon, that's where we work in conjunction with them to build out these solutions. I talked earlier on around collaborative decisions. So at a high level, this is whereby people in an organization, and we've seen a huge impact of this around new product development, for example, where you're bringing innovation councils together. They could be in remote locations, but they could be deciding on multi-million euro projects across, and they need to decide across 15 dimensions, weighted scoring, and all of that is all brought together within our product, and it's worth a view, I believe. So just moving on and talking about one of their dark processes, and this is actually to combine this with something mentioned earlier, was around public accessible forms. So Aon had a situation whereby they had companies that had, so construction companies, engineering companies that had contractors, and then they would, working together, would win a piece of work. And then when they went on site, there could be 10 contractor companies, and within those 10 contractor companies, there could be 500 subcontractors. So before I can let these guys in on site as the foreman, how do I know that they are covered for insurance for this site, for this day, as they may be moving to another site tomorrow, so on and so forth. So this platform, which we've built out, and it worked very well, delivered on time, a matter of weeks, whereby we were able to roll this out, demonstrate the value, bring in some pilot customers, and they've seen a huge traction, great response to this, but very much around this public accessible, secure, connecting how they use FlowForma back out to their clients to share information with them. So that has proved to be a really strong benefit of the platform. And we come across a lot of similar stories from other customers. We have some examples of where we've organizations such as Uniphar, so life sciences supply chain organization, a public limited company. Speaking with the head of IT this morning, they talked about 56 processes that have been rolled out across the organization. Approximately 30 of them are everyday processes, another 26 are around specific business processes they deal with through their supply chain. So a huge success story. And what very quickly, what they've been really pleased about is that, again, we're backing up what we are saying. So they were able to bring in the summer 4 interns, train them up in the product, and had them actually delivering projects in a matter of weeks. And they very much seen that as a testament to the simplicity of the product. In Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, within the space of 12 months, they built out 64 processes within the organization. Huge achievement. And we deal with the guys in there, and they'd admit, we're not software developers, but we're IT, and I understand that. And they said, so this tool really suited their demands. We've actually been speaking with a customer recently in Singapore, and they talked around, I'm actually a developer, previously a developer. Now I've got different responsibilities, but I really liked being able to go back to John's point, back into. They enjoy still building out solutions. So they don't want to code, even though they're programmers by trade, and they've really engaged with the technology. And finally, then we have SR Oil, whereby they've taken 12 people. We went on site, trained up 12 people to enable the organization to roll out these processes themselves, be self-sufficient. And I'm going to come back to some of the services we've added to these customers, in addition to support and governance a little bit later. So, John, yeah, at this stage, this is our Q&A, so I'm gonna hand back to you and let us chat.
Yeah. What's the first question you want to get into, Neil?
I suppose, John, in terms of the challenges in today's organizations, what are we seeing? What are we seeing out there in terms of culture? What are we finding that's a challenge from a culture perspective to adopting these technologies?
I think culture is probably the biggest barrier, Neil. There is an attitude, and again, this in part reflects history, people's histories. But there is an attitude that if you give business people the opportunity to create applications, they invariably will make a mess. They invariably will create something that IT inherits and then has to figure out how to deal with. And you know, this is, I think, the rogue IT idea, you know, circa 2017. What I keep reminding people is that rogue IT is based on unmanaged platforms, as you highlighted as well. If we move this work onto managed platforms and we basically make it somebody's job to support these business folks, they're going to do the work anyway. They're going to do it anyway. They're not being served. They're going to help themselves, try to help themselves anyway. Let's harness that. I've been singing this song for 5 years. Slowly but surely, I think people are starting to get it, that this is different. This time it's different. It's not like the bad old days with you know, with multiple sources of the truth on spreadsheets and so forth. There is an opportunity, in fact, to really progress here and harness these people. So that is the biggest that is in my mind the biggest hurdle for us to overcome.
Yeah, and it's what we have found is very much around, and we talked about Aon earlier on, and by their nature, we're dealing with progressive companies, and to add to that, progressive attitudes in IT. So they're embracing the fact. So we've heard in leaner times, let's do more with less. What we're finding is that if we're able to talk to people about doing more with more, that's really enabling the citizen developer. So yeah, the culture shift is really important, but we're finding if we're dealing with that progressive culture already, it's really positive. And
right.
And from an organizational perspective, overall in an organization, how do you find what is needed? What is needed for these technologies?
Well, two things from an organizational perspective. One is the collaborative relationship that I described in that one slide, where you've got a technical team, an IT team that's supporting you know, business people who are self-serving. You know, those support teams are few and far between. Seeing more of them, but like to see a whole lot more. You know, generally, oftentimes as you had described, if the business folks need support, they go to the vendor, you know, to get that support, to get the services in effect, which is fine. But you really want to graduate to make this work is crucial to the company's mission. So you really want to graduate to you know, a more of a change to the internal organization. The other organizational issue is that, again, these people they'll only do so much on their own time. You know, ultimately, if part of their job is actually to deliver, part of the value of their job is actually to deliver software, we need to recognize that in their job descriptions. We may need to recognize it in their compensation, you know, and maybe in other ways as well. But it really calls into question the you know, the garden variety job descriptions out there that don't include software work. They really need to.
Yeah, and yeah, we've been consulting on that actually ourselves around job descriptions, and as we see it, there's two dimensions to it. So one being business enablers in the vision, and you mentioned earlier on around the power users, etc. So very apt on the 3 different descriptions of citizen developers. But from business enablers that are close to the business, you know, changing their job specs to include, you know, deliver process improvement projects through the use of technology. You're going to have people that will embrace that. And if you can bring them in with that attitude, so I go back to Uni, for example, where they brought in interns. So they're really hungry, they're really eager. So just by bringing them into an organization and saying, this is what we want you to work on, as well as helping our business process accounts payable, etc., and so on. You know, and we're talking about the millennials, John, as well. They're really, that's what they expect. So I think that's really worked. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things we have to acknowledge here, one of the things we have to recognize here is that business people, you talk about millennials, they're very tech savvy, but most business people are tech savvy these days. We've been working with software products, oftentimes introduced through personal productivity tools, but then often through, people are working on cloud-based, environments. People are really smart about technology. Some of them really have great aptitude. Many of them have very great aptitude. So it's not like 20, 30 years ago where people couldn't find their way around a keyboard and they just didn't know anything. People are really smart. They need support and they need some guidance. That's the way I feel about it.
And I suppose the second dimension we see is the changing role of business analysts. And interested in your views on this. So we would have a sense that you're changing them from analyzing and defining a process to analyze, define, implement, and refine the process. So the more connected, right, the more deliverable. Do you find that?
Absolutely. I think this is there's a really key switch that we need to throw here, if you will, or a transition that we need to make here. Most business analysts, their jobs are built around requirements, and their job is to gather requirements from the business and convey those requirements, typically through Word documents, documents, to development teams that then go and implement those. Now we all know that doesn't work very well. Decades doesn't work very well. There's a lot that gets lost in translation. So with low code now, you've got the ability to say to these folks that the way that you're going to approach requirements is by actually implementing something, because you can do it really quickly. You can implement ideas really quickly. The truth about requirements is that we learn what the requirements are as the software project progresses. The problem has been that when software projects take a year, it's a disaster when we don't meet the requirements. Now it's completely turned on its head. We've got environments that allow us to learn in a day or two whether we're right or wrong, or whether the idea we had for the application is going to work. So it frees these business analysts, as you said, sure, they're conveying requirements, but they're proving them out. It's actually way more accurate representation of what the business needs than we've ever had before.
Yeah, and you mentioned test and learn approach earlier on, and that's exactly what we see it. So if the business analysts buy into it, and we even find where we're trying to encourage people to, so we have a feature that lets you auto document the process at the end. So it's changing the approach. So test and learn at the start, and then let's nail down the documentation.
That's right.
So get your user
exactly right.
Super.
The thing is that's always been the reality. Although we've tried to kid ourselves that these big these long tortured requirements processes are gonna help us overcome that reality. They never did. So now we have a chance to actually function in the real world, which is great. It's going to be a whole lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. So just thanks for that, John. So just and we'll be coming back at the end then. Neve will be bringing us through some Q&A from the audience. So in terms of what we're finding very quickly around FlowForma BPM users are benefiting from, I've talked quite a lot about speed to deliver, speed to value. So at least 10 times faster traditional software development tools. I think this comes across quite a lot in that in the low code space. Empowering the users, so that no code approach we would be very tied to. Better value for money. We operate fully 100% in a software as a service mode. So low recurring license pricing and so on and so forth, and collaborative decision making being there. So quite a lot of uniqueness around supporting key decisions within the business, including making that external access. So obviously there's more people can find out from, they can go and download an independent report from our website at that address. And also, why not come in and try a free trial? So free 30-day trial, there's online support and learning resources available as you go through that. So all of that is available there in the platform. So I'm just going to hand it back to Neve, and Neve, just in terms of questions and answers.
Thank you, Neil. You've been listening to John Rymer from Forrester and Neil Young from FlowForma. Thank you both. We do still have some time left for questions and answers from the audience, so if you have any questions for Neil or John, please feel free to type them into the chat box in your control panel. I know we've got a few questions in already during the webinar. One of the questions that's been asked by attendee is, how do I find citizen developers within my business? John, that might be a question that you can answer for our attendee.
Yes, this is a good question. It's a really good question. They do. First of all, they do exist in the business. They exist in every business. The reason that I wanted to define the three types, or however many types there were, was to help us identify these people more readily than we have been earlier. So first of all, your power users. If you probably know who some of the go-to people are in your offices and your operations when there's an application issue or a solution that needs to be created quickly. Those people tend to be very well known. You know, and people in the organization are likely to tell you who those people are. Who do they really rely on? The business developers are folks. They're typically going to be folks that are more administrative in managerial roles. You'll typically find them in your operations groups: sales operations, marketing operations, field operations, supply operations, and so forth. Those managers of those organizations typically will build software out of necessity because they tend to be grossly underserved. So you'll find those folks, typically they're already engaged in creating some of the software they need, and you know, they just need some encouragement and some support to further expand what they're doing, and maybe they need some relief from their day jobs in order to complete the work. So essentially, you're looking for people who show a willingness and an aptitude to solve business problems with technology. And what they're probably working in spreadsheets today or databases. What you want to do is, like I say, shift them over to platforms. I hope that helps.
Great. Thanks, John. Okay, so someone else is asking, typically, how long does it take to build, test, and deploy your workflow? Neil, you might be able to answer that one.
Yeah, sure. So if we go back to the everyday processes, we have seen organizations, so you can build in the space of an hour or two, but in terms of bringing it through all the steps and getting it live, we have worked with organizations and seen organizations themselves pretty much go from start to finish and live within 2 days with those everyday processes. Again, it depends on the complexity around that process. To bring it up into the dark processes, where it's getting into a little bit more complexity, that can range from 20 up to 50 days effort, depending again on the complexity of the project, and typically you're around the 20-day mark. And I'm talking purely work effort here, because and again, there is another opportunity here, because you were empowering business analysts and process owners. You don't have all the layers of a project team to roll these technologies out. So you're really dealing with 1 or 2 man teams to roll this technology out, as opposed to 5, 6, 7 people in traditional waterfall development. So that's what we're kind of seeing as a scale, to give people an indication.
Thanks, Neil. So John, another question for you from an attendee. He's asking, do you have any estimates or percentages of organizations that are formally adopting or accepting citizen development, and the intensity of the adoption?
Interesting. Well, adoption of low-code platforms for business developers is one thing. Most of the vendors are actually showing very, very high growth rates. which suggests that adoption is high. But adoption of the kinds of collaborative relationships that I described is actually much, much lower. I don't have a percentage. I would guess it's less than 10%. Of enterprises have really set up effective support organizations and strategies, including platforms, to support software delivery by their business people. But I don't have a survey to back that up. Honestly, I wish I saw this more often, and I'm promoting it as hard as I can.
Thanks, John. That's great. We've lots of questions coming in. I think just time for one more right now. Neil, I'll direct this question to you. How long is the training cycle for non-technical people who might be tasked with building out workflows in FlowForma?
Okay, great. I can answer that really quick. 2 days. So you can get up and running within 2 days, and we have full course material there. So be that online or be that in classroom training. But 2 days typically, and that would include exercises, and then you're moving into a place. So you may very well build something real as part of that tuition. But 2 days will be a very good guidance.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of our hour together. We didn't get to answer all the questions, but we'll come back to everyone straight away after the webinar and get those answered. If you have any other questions, you can contact us at info@flowforma.com. And as Neil already mentioned, on our website, you can access a form to sign up for a 30-day free trial of FlowForma BPM. No credit card, no commitment required. You can book a one-to-one demo with one of our experts. You can also find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook for updates. Lastly, I'd like to let you know that at the end of the webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen. If you could take 2 minutes to fill it out, we would greatly appreciate your feedback, and we really value the responses we get. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, John and Neil, for speaking today.